There are no rebuttal arguments, and now the jury will have a week-long break. The judge has scheduled closing arguments to begin on November 28th. George Wagner is the defendant who is facing 22 charges, including aggravated murder, for the deaths of 8 members of the Roden family. This happened in 2016. The prosecutors say that he and his family conspired together to kill the Rodens over an alleged child custody dispute. Still with us, attorneys Tammy Allison and Matthew Barhoma. All right, this case, 46 days of trial. That's a very long trial. Circumstantial evidence. A lot of people say, where's the evidence that he did it, that this son, that George did it? Jake, the brothers entered a plea, mom's entered a plea. Where's the evidence for this one? Tammy, do you think the evidence has been presented?
You know what? I don't think so, Ashley. I don't think the evidence has been presented beyond a reasonable doubt for the jury to find him guilty, because there's so many questions, and that's a lot of information for the jury to sit back and weigh in on in order to find this one individual guilty, given the fact that there's been so many witnesses in so many days and so much evidence for them to review.
Right, there's a lot of evidence for them to review. Matthew, what do you think? Do you think there's reasonable doubt in this case?
I think there is. I think that there may not be able to get a conviction on him, at least to some of these major counts especially. And ultimately, I think that he may be able to get off of this. The big thing you got to remember is that it's very circumstantial. And the biggest thing that the prosecution has is a whole lot of motive, right? But they leave the jury with a lot of lingering questions, I believe. And I think this 1 week period here is going to give them an opportunity to kind of dissect it, take it in, come back, hear closing arguments, make a decision. So we'll see.
Sleep on it. I've always said when I was on the bench, if I couldn't make a decision because I didn't have enough of the law or the knowledge, I would have attorneys brief it and I would do my research and then I would sleep on it, because sometimes you need that time to figure out exactly what it means and what the evidence means in this case. One of the things I have to point out is a brilliant job by the defense saying in the opening statement, this defendant, George, this brother, had tried to distance himself from the family. He stayed away from this family. He wasn't involved, and then followed that up by George choosing to testify. Let's listen together to some of George Wagner's own words, his testimony in this case.
You said that the night of the homicides, you went to bed at 10 o'clock.
10-ish, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time.
Okay. And you said that was your usual bedtime.
Usually somewhere around there.
Okay. All right. And so do you recall, again, being interviewed at the border and saying that the 4 of you, well, the 6 of you actually, your mom, your dad, your brother, yourself, Sophia, and Bovine, were watching a movie, and you were up until, you didn't go to bed until 12:30.
I don't remember what time it was.
You indicated that you watched a movie, a fairy movie, correct?
A what?
You indicated that you watched a fairy movie.
Don't remember what.
A movie that Sophia wanted to watch.
I remember watching a movie with the kids at this point. I don't remember what it was.
Okay. So now we know, at least according to Jake, that Chris Sr. and Gary were killed at 11 o'clock, right?
I think that's what he said.
Which makes your story at the border impossible, right?
Again, I don't remember exactly everything I said at the border.
Well, I assume you were trying your best to tell the truth when you were interviewed at the border, correct?
To my knowledge of what I remembered.
Okay, and this was much closer to the time of the offense when you were interviewed at the border, right? It was
a year and a half, I think.
Well, it was May of 17, which is a year.
A little over a year.
Just a little over a year, yeah. And now we're at 6.5 years later?
I think it's around 6.5, maybe a little more.
Okay. So would you agree that your memory would have been better then than it is now as far as times go?
I can't say yes or no because I really don't remember what I said back then.
How could Jake and your father have been up on the hill killing Chris Sr. and Gary less than an hour after you went into your bedroom?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
You said there's no way they could have left that night without you hearing them.
I remember, I don't believe they left. I believe I told them I couldn't see them getting down the stairs without me hearing them.
Okay.
If I remember, it might not be in that wording.
Yeah, you actually insisted on it and said it more than 15 times to the agents at the border.
I remember saying a lot. I don't remember how many times.
Okay. So you were adamant that there was no way, because of where your bedroom is in that house, that anybody could have left that night without you knowing that even when the neighbor down the street gets in their vehicle and leaves, it wakes you up.
The neighbor down the street drives a Dodge Diesel like we did.
When you were trying your best to be honest, right?
Yes.
You told them that your dad went upstairs and went to bed with your mother.
It's a possibility. I don't remember saying that, but I might have.
Okay. Was that true?
I don't remember the statement. I don't remember.
I'm asking you, is it true that your dad went upstairs with your mother?
At this point, I don't know because I don't remember.
All right, Tammy, let me ask you, the defendant testifying, did you find him sympathetic or not?
I found him just there, nonchalant, but at the same time holding his composure and trying to, it seemed like he was trying to comprehend the questions that the prosecution was asking him, and it did seem like he was attempting to truthfully answer, but the questions that were presented to him were all over the place.
We're all over the place. That's almost exactly what Julie Grant said when she was watching the cross-examination and said, she's all over the map. What is she asking? All right, Matthew, credible or not? Do you think the jury will find this defendant credible?
You know, I actually think they will. He's a good client, I could tell you that. He's very, very well coached. Okay, he's well prepped at least, not coached, but he's well prepped, okay? He knows exactly when to differentiate on the timeline, when to say, I don't recall, when to throw it back and question, you know, the line of questioning. And I wish that the line of questioning had better impeachment. I think you could have impeached someone like him a lot better. You could have really came for him, showed his credibility to be completely off. And I just don't think the prosecution did that.
Matthew, we are both sitting here, Tammy and I, nodding our head along with you, saying, that's right, Matthew, you got it right, because I think we all would have liked to have seen that go a little differently in terms of cross-examination of any witness, really. All right, you're both going to stay with us. Thank you for that. In just a few minutes, the latest in the OnlyFans model murder case, newly released evidence photos and testimony from the medical examiner assigned to this case. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us. Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Call now.
Court TV is following developments in the case against OnlyFans model Courtney Clenny. She is due back in court December 8th to hear whether she will be granted a release from jail ahead of her upcoming trial. Clenny is being charged with second-degree murder in the stabbing death of her boyfriend, Christian Obumseli. That happened earlier this year, and the prosecutors have now released new photos of the moments after the stabbing during her two-day Arthur hearing. A picture of the alleged bloody murder weapon was also included in those photos. We have it up for you now. You can see what the alleged murder weapon looked like. Dr. Kenneth Hutchins, the medical examiner assigned to this case, was called to the stand during Thursday's hearing. He detailed his post-mortem investigation and testified to whether Clenny threw the knife that ultimately killed Obumseli.
You know, based on the information that you had in your observations, you know, the position of the wound, the angle of the wound, the depth of the wound, does that support that the victim and the defendant were face-to-face when this happened?
As a hypothetical?
As a hypothetical.
Yes.
And as another hypothetical, based on the same position, observations, the angle, the depth, does it support that the victim was stabbed?
Yes.
Based on the same observations, does it support that at least 8 to 12 pounds of force would have been used in order to create that damage?
In general, yes.
And that damage being breaking through the skin, plunging the knife 3 inches into the victim's chest, and cutting through muscle, eventually the subclavian artery?
Yes.
Now, based on the information you received that the defendant was alleged to have thrown this knife, you know, do your observations support that?
I'm not an expert in knife throwing. If the person who supposedly did this is an expert knife thrower, and the knife is the type of knife that you can throw, I guess that could have happened.
Did you receive any information that the defendant was a knife thrower?
No.
So based on that fact that you did not receive that information, would it support that?
No.
All right, still with us, attorneys Tammy Allison and Matthew Barhoma. Looking so forward to breaking this one down with you both because, first of all, I think this expert, this medical examiner has testified before because he immediately said, is this a hypothetical? So we know he is saying, based on the autopsy, face-to-face, that the victim was stabbed, the one who was killed, that it required at least 8 to 10 pounds of force. But then he also said that the knife being thrown and killing him probably didn't happen unless it was an expert knife thrower. Matthew, what do you think? Does that just destroy the defendant's defense?
It does. I wish he was a little bit more on the point. Like, I wish he would just say it, but it is what it is. I think that he provides very relevant testimony as to what happened. And I think that this is not going to be good for the defense. He is basically indicating from his analysis, this is a full-blown stabbing. This is an intentional killing. Whether it be self-defense or not, that's a different discussion. This isn't merely throwing a knife. This is an actual stabbing. That's what I think that comes across as.
Right, and the face-to-face when it happened. Tammy, your thoughts?
My thoughts are the fact that he said and prefaced it with, is this a hypothetical? You know, because he wants to speak factually. It seemed like he was itching to speak factually with his observations and not necessarily in the terms of a hypothetical, so that he could actually testify to the truth of what his expertise is based off of what actually happened. But hypothetically speaking, I believe his testimony shows that this could not be self-defense as the defendant is trying to present to the court as her defense for this second-degree murder charge.
So if you were going to cross-examine that medical examiner, is that what you would do? Would you say, let's put hypotheticals aside?
Absolutely.
And the facts support, and then get that out of him?
I believe that would have been a stronger way to ask questions so the record could be very clear, because having hypotheticals and a response to hypotheticals on the record does not assist not the prosecution or the defense. We have to have truth from an expert. That's why an expert medical examiner is there, so that he can testify based off of his knowledge, his expertise, the years of experience he's been there. This is a large Nigerian man who was stabbed by someone who is smaller than him, and that is a Caucasian woman. She's substantially smaller, and the testimony he provided was prefaced with, hypothetically speaking, 8 to 10 pounds of force would cause that injury. No, we need the truth. We need to know, not hypothetically speaking.
What happened?
Caused it?
What happened? What caused it? So a reminder, this is an Arthur hearing, meaning that she's asking the court to let her out pending her trial, to get out on bond. Now, it was noted that in 1 year she made $1.8 million. So the state has been saying, no, she's a flight risk because she does have the financial means to go somewhere. So keeping that in mind, one of the things I think that the Arthur hearing allowed us to do was to lay eyes on the defendant and watch how she reacted to evidence being presented. So let's keep an eye on her and watch what happens. She's in court for this hearing, and the 911 call was played.
My arm. Ma'am, so my boyfriend is dying of a stabbing. Ma'am, what is the address? What's the address? 3131. 3131 Northeast 7th Ave. Please, God, please. Come see my boyfriend. Ma'am, is this a house apartment or a business? I want you to 745-2582. Is this a house apartment or a business? Baby, I'm so sorry. Baby. Ma'am, can you hear me?
All right, Matthew, Tammy and I had talked a little bit about the demeanor, but how would you, in your opinion, you have a lot of expertise in terms of dealing with defendants, with clients, being in court, watching all the parties. What did her behaviors there mean to you, if anything?
You know, sure, she's showing some kind of remorse, but the question that I am left with is she remorseful about herself and about the fact that she's about to undergo this kind of scrutiny and trial? Or is this bringing her back and she's remembering the self-defense era of what and the kind of trauma that she suffered? I think she's crying for herself, if I'm being very frank, given the evidence that I've seen thus far, and it's been very one-sided, right? I think that she is remorseful over maybe what the next decade or 2 decades of her life brings. So, you know, she does show remorse. You know, we do see her crying, and it is traumatic. I'm not taking that away from her, but I question what her motives are for crying.
And Tammy, the Arthur hearing, are you surprised that the prosecutor is presenting as much evidence as they are? Because they're really giving the defense a look at, this is what our case is going to look like. Here's what the medical examiner is going to say. But it's not for trial that they're doing this. They're just trying to prevent her from getting out of jail.
Yes, I'm not surprised at all. I think that they have to present this much evidence because when they present this much evidence, it's showing that she's going to be a risk to society, not only in terms of being a flight risk, but a risk of possibly hurting somebody else. She already was extradited from Hawaii back to Miami whenever the charges were brought forward. So she has the resources, as we discussed earlier, to travel anywhere. So I do believe that with this type of crime, and because of the seriousness of it, and there's a Nigerian-American man that is dead, that they want to make sure she is not released so that there is no potential harm caused to anyone else.
I agree with everything you just said. I think that's exactly what the state wants and intends to do. The judge did delay his ruling, interestingly, until December, so we'll find out then what his decision's going to be. You're going to stay with us. Up next, we have all kinds of legal news that you don't want to miss. A preview of the Border Patrol serial killer trial. It's a sad and twisted story, and it's Court TV's next big case.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, the murders of 4 college students leaves a community searching for answers.
There was no burglary. There was no robbery.